Do you think that pharmaceutical companies are the only ones that run clinical trials and that there's always a money motivation? Do you think that there's no way that good old drugs can get repurposed for cancer? Those are wrong. Stick around. We'll talk about that. Hello, and welcome to Elevating Cancer Treatment, where we explain the science and debunk myths to help you navigate your health journey. My background is a little different. Beyond educating about cancer, I'm actually designing new drugs that are defining the future of oncology. This direct, hands-on experience offers me a very different perspective of how these cancer treatments work on the body, interact with the cancer cells, and cause side effects. And these are insights that I'm excited to share with you. If that sounds interesting, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And please share it if you find it useful. I'm Dr. Chaplin. An important reminder, I'm a PhD, not an MD. The information in this video is education, and it's not medical advice. Every cancer is unique, and no general information applies to everyone. And two quick things. First, as a thank you for being here, I've created a free resource, 10 Things to Elevate Your Chemo Journey, which you can download from the link below. And second, by signing up, you'll also get updates on that innovative cancer treatment I'm working on. I'm confident it represents a significant advancement in immunotherapy. So please take a moment, download your free guide, and join us in shaping the future of cancer treatment. So today I want to talk about something sort of as a prelude, because I've got two different news stories coming up that I want to let you know about, and they both have to do with repurposing drugs and clinical trials. So a lot of people think that every clinical trial costs a huge amount of money. And it's true that many clinical trials do, but there's a lot of different flavors of clinical trials, and only a fraction of them are for licensing new drugs. Licensing a new drug, that's what we call an interventional trial, though that term is used for more than just that. So for drug registration, getting a drug on the market, you have to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Those are insanely expensive, upwards of $500 million per drug. Insanely expensive, very risky, and the government doesn't pay for that. If a company wants to sell a drug, of course, you're going to make them pay the $500 million to do the clinical trials. So for drug approvals, that fraction of interventional trials, it makes sense for the pharma companies to pay for them. No one else is going to pay for that. But there are other kinds of clinical trials. There are other interventional trials, which are much cheaper, much smaller, and are government funded or university funded, or even sometimes just individual investigator funded. If a drug is already on the market, you can give it to people. If you have a doctor willing to write prescriptions for off-label use, you can just give it to a bunch of people and see what happens. Those kinds of repurposing trials are often not done by pharmaceutical companies, at least not at the beginning, because you can get efficacy data really fast, really cheap. The fact that they haven't been done with things like ivermectin is a really big sign that there's nothing there to look for, but they do happen. They've happened with hydralazine, they've happened with everolimus, they've happened with other drugs, and we'll talk about some of those. Those clinical trials, they're still interventional trials because you're testing a drug, you're intervening in the disease. Those are much smaller, much cheaper, usually not done by the pharma companies. Now, if those work, then we know that the drug works for this new disease. It works for this new indication, but that doesn't mean that insurance will cover it because it's not licensed for that use. We know we can use it, anyone can use it, doctor can write an off-label prescription for it, but insurance won't cover it. For a lot of the old drugs that we're talking about repurposing, the cost is low enough that paying out of pocket is actually really worthwhile. Old drugs, generic drugs, tend to be much less expensive, and getting those, even off-label, even if insurance doesn't pay for it at all, can be really, really helpful and totally worth the small added cost directly out of pocket. If you want to expand the drug's approval, if you want to have it approved for more things, let's say for cancer, it was originally a blood pressure drug, but now you're talking about using it for cancer, then it has to go through a full drug approval set of trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, for that particular disease. Now, you can abbreviate a lot of those because the phase 1 data, that's just safety. We already know the drug is safe. It's been on the market for a long time. You can move forward pretty quickly. You just have to show safety in the population that you're looking at. Again, dosing, have a pretty good idea from previous studies, from use for years, because you're repurposing an existing drug. That should be pretty fast. Phase 1, phase 2, those should move fast. But the lion's share of the cost and the time and the preparation is in the phase 3. Those are by far the largest studies, and those have to be done all over again because you're looking at trying to prove drug efficacy in a completely different disease, which, by the way, doesn't often happen. Drugs tend to be really good for what they were designed for and not very good for anything else. If a drug is good for multiple diseases, that is incredibly rare. So this idea that some folks have that if a drug is good for one thing, it must be good for all things, that's just not the way drugs work. That's not the way the body works. Exceptions to that are very much exceptions. They're wonderful when we find them, but they are not the rule. Okay, so in terms of other things, there are clinical trials that are called observational trials. These are trials where you're trying to figure something out. And again, if you're talking diet, if you're talking like zero carb diets or keto diets for their impact on cancer, those are easy to set up. They are cheap. Universities do them all the time. Universities with medical wings. Doctors can set those up if they've got the right resources. It's cheap, it's easy, it's straightforward, and these sort of small clinical trials are much easier to do. There's a ton more of them. They can be done well, and they can be done really poorly, but they can also be done easily. And so you tend to have a lot more of them, but you also have to look carefully at the way that they were structured and do they actually do what they say they're doing. Now, if a clinical trial is going to be reported out and the results made public, you have to make public all of it. This idea that companies hide stuff is partially true, and it's important to understand that partially true. If a clinical trial is published, everything has to be published. The statistics may be done wrong, they may have done the wrong studies, they may misinterpret stuff, but you have to publish everything. If you don't, it's a major ethical failure and you can get censured, you can get your ability to do clinical trials in the future taken away from you. But small clinical trials especially, and especially when they don't show what you want to see, or if it's just boring. If you did a clinical trial and the results were so ho-hum that nobody's excited about it, pulling all the data together, doing all the statistics, writing it up, publishing it, can be a very labor-intensive, very expensive, and long process. It costs researchers a ton of money to do this process. Not just for the trial, but just to publish. And so if a clinical trial is very boring, often they won't get published. Somewhere around a third of all clinical trials don't get published. Now, that actually really sucks. It's terribly unfortunate because we'd like to see that data. Again, having negative data is good. It shows us what didn't work. And you can't force people to publish. They may have gotten an NIH grant, some other grant to run that clinical trial. They ran it. They spent the money the way that they were supposed to. They should have an obligation to publish the negative data, but there's no mechanism to force groups to do that. And so there are missing clinical trials, but there aren't altered clinical trials. There aren't clinical trials that hide stuff unless you hide the entire clinical trial. That's important to understand because if you're online looking at comments often enough, you'll see people saying that pharma companies manipulate their clinical trials and you can't trust any of them. That's the opposite. Clinical trial data is the most trustworthy source out there because they have to report everything. If they report anything, they have to report everything. And that's really important to understand because many folks think the exact opposite. What really falls into those issues are online comments testimonials, because those are the places where you get partial reporting. Please go see the episode we did on testimonials and issues with testimonials. I'm not saying that testimonials aren't true, just that very often they are biased. People don't understand what they're talking about, and there are issues with testimonials. People will report things too early and give the wrong appearance, and then they don't come back to walk back the glowing reviews. Anyway, go see that. Clinical trials don't have that problem. Self-reporting does have that problem. It's important to understand this distinction. So clinical trials, they're big interventional trials for new drug registration. Huge, expensive, always paid by pharma companies. If you want someone else to pay for it, then you find someplace to come up with $500 million to license a new drug. Our government's not going to do it. Smaller interventional studies happen all the time. I'll be talking about a couple of those soon. They're a great source of new ideas and getting data for repurposing drugs for off-label use. Again, if you want to get that drug approved for the indication so insurance will cover it, then you have to go back and redo the entire package for the new disease. And then there are observational trials looking for, can we find new biomarkers? Can we find things that correlate with disease? Can we see if diet has an impact? All of those kinds of things. That's how we have data showing that, say, processed red meat impacts colon cancer rates, that smoking causes cancer. And we have the numbers for that. We know that smoking causes a 25 times increase, 2,500% increase, whereas processed red meat has maybe a 20 to 50% increase for colon cancer. We have these numbers because of those observational clinical trials, and we have biomarker data for development of new targeted therapies because of these sorts of observational trials, getting clinical samples and studying them. So I'm glad that we talked about that. I've got 2 exciting things coming up for you soon, talking about drug repurposing, and looking forward to getting back to you with that. So, beyond these videos, if you need more personalized guidance or a deeper dive into specific treatments to have your treatment be as effective as possible, I offer one-on-one sessions and medical advocacy. I'm also in the process of developing an exclusive video series that breaks down each cancer treatment and drug in detail, along with interferences to avoid and ways to optimize for the ideal results. You can find information on both of these resources on our website, which is linked down below. Again, if you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, click the notification bell, and subscribe to our channel for more science-based cancer insights.